WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. I'd love to tell you we still have hockey to talk about, but we don't. And, of course, we're going to do plenty of World Cup around here and the residue of the Ravens throw it around this week at Owings Mills. But the Orioles are still playing baseball, and Luke Jones is suffering through 4-hour miserable losses and sweeps at the hands of the Boston Red Sox. And here come the Miami Marlins and bobbleheads and Lord knows whatever else is going on. And my dear Orioles series will begin early next week, Luke. And you know I've been peeling back the onion. You and I have been talking a little bit sort of behind the scenes of what the hell this is and what becomes of this. But on a day-by-day basis, the hardest thing that I have to wrap my arms around that I don't have to do and I haven't really dealt with over the last 5 or 6 weeks is watch it, play it, show up for it, talk about it, be immersed in it because it's on in my house. It's kind of sometimes the sound's on, sometimes it's not, but this is the season that doesn't exist. So when they lose 3 games to the Red Sox as they've done, when they get swept away by the Blue Jays as they did, to your point, if it's no one's fault and it's everybody's fault and it's no one's fault, well, then whose fault is it? And suddenly no one cares anymore.
Well, it's just, and it's terrible because so many people who love baseball, from April until into September, and even people that love baseball, but, and then the NFL is king, at least until the end of August. It's the soundtrack of spring and summer. Whether you're listening on the radio, whether you're watching on TV. And, some seasons are better than others. There's no question about that, and that applies to any market. That applies to any team. But when you have a season like this, where you're talking about a team that is flirting with being, not just flirting, they're on the cusp of being 30 games under 500, and we're still a couple weeks out from the 4th of July. It's staggering. It's a historic kind of a pace that they're on right now. I've been regularly checking where the 1988 Orioles were through X number of games, whatever night we're talking about, whatever the latest loss is that we're discussing, and the 2018 Orioles are right there. Now, if you recall 2010, when they threw Tremblay out and they had Juan Samuel managing for the early portion of the summer, and then Buck came in and they played really good baseball over the last 2 months. That season was on a pace very similar to this, but it really is, it gets to a point where even over the 14 years of losing, certainly by this point in the season, most of those seasons they were out of contention. They weren't really relevant, but they were rarely this historically poor.
Well, they're relevant because they're this bad, right? I said to my wife a week ago, they're a bad week away from sort of being on the 88 Orioles pace, and this has been the bad week where suddenly they're on the 1988 Orioles pace, and this is the 3rd time, I think, I've pulled up while you and I have been on the air, the Wikipedia for the 88 Orioles to kind of get their stats and, to see names like Rick Shue and Pete Stanisiak sort of pop back up here onto my radar again, but you do start to look at the schedule and results and say, all right, well, where were they at this point in the season? Well, first week of June, they were 15-45. Well, this team is 19-48. It's not really all that dissimilar. 19-50 is what the team was on June the 21st. 19-50. This team is 19-48.
Yeah, so you said a bad week. Well, they had this bad week. Of course, they had the nice series against the Mets, and then they went to Toronto and looked like they were going to win Game 1, and Brad Brock blows a save, and they've been, it's tough to say circling the drain when they've been in the toilet from the first week of the season, and they just never got off the mat. But
how many floors up is that drain?
The thing that continues to stick out for me, and look, we've talked so much about Chris Davis. We'll continue to talk about Chris Davis. We've talked about Jonathan Scope, Trey Mancini. Go down the list. It's a much shorter conversation when you talk about guys that have actually performed well or even just okay. That's a pretty short list there. But the thing that continues to just amaze me, and I actually, Baseball Reference has the play index. If you subscribe to that, you can. It's so much great information if you're someone that's really into looking at history and numbers and finding different streaks and different things like that. It was kind of the renaissance of, if you remember last year, the Orioles had that streak of 20 straight games where they allowed 5 or more runs, and they tied a major league record doing that. I continue to be amazed, though, at how horrendous, not bad, not below average, not one-dimensional, not limited, not flawed, all the different things we've talked about at various points, even when the Orioles have had some good years. We've talked about their offense, as far as being so reliant on the home run and being really good for times and then being really, not doing much for extended
and exciting on a night when you take your kid out and they hit 5 home runs.
Yeah.
Night,
I mean,
right?
But that was kind of who they were. That was who they were in 2014 even. That was who they were in 2016. And you accepted that. What they are now offensively is just so off-putting, alarming, historically inept. I mean, whatever adjective you want to throw out there in a negative sense, it applies. And I was looking at the play index at Baseball Reference, looking at some of the worst run-scoring teams in club history, and I'm going off of runs scored per game. The Orioles entering Wednesday's finale against the Red Sox, they lost 5-1. They managed 1 run in that game, and not exactly a shock when Chris Sale's on the hill, in fairness to them. I mean, they're not scoring against nobody, so they weren't going to score against Sale. But there are only 5 teams that have scored at a worse rate in club history. And I'll just go down the list for you. The Orioles right now are right around 3.49 runs per game. That's worse than the American League, and they've kind of been jockeying back and forth with their opponent this weekend, the Marlins, for worst in baseball. But those 5 teams, the 1955 Orioles, the 1988 Orioles, no big surprise there, the 1958 Orioles.
Well, we went a long time without having a really crappy team here before '88, right?
Sure. But to further my point, 1972, which you look at the run-scoring environment of that season, that was actually an average offense or slightly below average if you look at the run-scoring environment for the entire league. And 1954 was the worst at 3.14 runs per game. 3 of those teams are in the 1950s. I already mentioned 1972 was a year where the offense was way down around baseball. So when you take into account the rest of the league and the context of that era, this might be, when it's all said and done, if the Orioles continue at the rate they're going, and we assume they're trading Manny Machado and Adam Jones, who's been at least okay. It hasn't been his best season, but he hasn't been particularly bad either. It is quite possible when you take into account adjusting for the league and the time period, the era, all of those different things, this might be the worst offense in the history of the franchise. And look, not that the pitching's been great by any stretch of the imagination, and certainly the pitching has had its times where it's been bad. But if I had told you before the season, even with Alex Cobb and even with Andrew Kashner being added to this rotation,
how could it be this bad? Right, yeah,
you wouldn't have been surprised, right?
No.
If I had told you that this offense would be the worst in the American League and flirting with being the worst in baseball and one of the worst 5 in franchise history, I think we both would have been surprised about that. Even acknowledging, yeah, it's flawed. Yeah, it's one-dimensional. Yeah, they rely too much on the home run. It continues to blow me away, not just Chris Davis, but everyone. And Davis is, he's the poster child and completely justified, but it blows me away how horrendous this offense has been. And it's really one of those things where I'm kind of amazed by it at this point. That's how bad it's been, looking at this from a historical context with the history of this team.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke. He is he's being penalized all summer. We put you in the box. So misconduct. You got to cover the Orioles. The draft came and went. They paraded some kids around last week, right? And then they come home, and it really is like a bad news bears kind of operation right now. And at some point, and look, we're going to go way into this next week. My dear Orioles series can't come a minute too soon. I know we're going to discuss this at 100,000 feet, 50,000 feet, but the weirdest part of this, to stay on track for this and for this weekend, is nothing has changed. That is really the incredible part of this, is how bad it is and how nothing has been done about it, nothing has been said about it, and historically that doesn't shock me either with the people that are running the operation, and we're going to go through that, piece by piece, but nothing's been done. That's the unprecedented part about this.
Yeah, and you know how I've felt about this all along, and I haven't changed my tune from a standpoint of I'm not going to be the guy that flat out says so and so should be fired. I'm not, that they're not saving the season. It's over. But that said, with that caveat provided, I am amazed that there hasn't been one meaningful change made. And look, I think it would be. I'm not sure what purpose it would serve at this point with the deadline now less than 2 months away. We're about 6-7 weeks away from the deadline.
Well, and everybody's getting fired at the end of the year, too, so then there's that, unless you had a AAA group you wanted to bring up or whatever, in a normal circuit. I don't mean Buck. I mean like a normal manager. If they were...
Right. But my point is with that, I mean, you have a manager and a GM who are both, have expiring contracts. We've said all along the assumption is that Duquette's not going to be back. 6 weeks ago, if you had asked me if Buck Showalter would be back, I would have leaned much more so to the yes side. I'm really not sure about that anymore. And, does it serve a purpose to make those changes now? I don't know. I mean, but that said, something. And even this goes back to something that I said even weeks ago, and this goes back to, and this is where it falls on ownership, even delivering a message, even if you're not going to make a change, you're not going to fire Scott Coolball right now, or you're not going to relieve Dan Duquette or reassign him or anything like that.
Hold on, are you asking for the vote of confidence press conference?
Not a vote of confidence. No, not a vote of confidence whatsoever. Because a vote of confidence. What confidence are you talking about? I mean, they're 30 games under 500. It would be.
I don't know. I'm making this up as we go along. I mean, I'm trying to figure out, and in my writing over the next couple of weeks, what. I mean, we can go through what they haven't done, right, and how effed up the place is. But all right, so what are you going to do beginning today? What's the new plan? What's today's plan? The problem is there's never been a plan.
But here's the start of this, and this is the point I was trying to make. It's very clear whether Peter Angelos, how much influence he has at this point in time in 2018, it's up for debate. But it's not up for debate that John and Lou Angelos have much more influence, more responsibilities than they have ever had. I think most people would agree with that if you have paid attention even a little bit, even going back to the off season with introducing the kids get in free thing with John Angelos talking about that. I mean, that's not something Peter Angelos did in the past. So my point with that is right. But my point with that is if the two Angelos boys are in charge now, or more in charge than they've ever been, why not at the very least deliver a message and say, look, this is completely unacceptable. We understand that. We're embarrassed. We are going to make changes. We are evaluating what's going to happen. We understand that this season is lost from a competitive standpoint, but we are making a vow now that we're doing everything we can over the next however long you want to give it. And if you want to make it the trade deadline or even say the end of the season, that we are going to be evaluating our practices, our organization, top to bottom, and we will fix this. It may not happen overnight, but we will fix this. That's a captain option for anyone to make if you're running an organization that has hit a losing period, and that's very clearly where the Orioles are right now, and that's putting it in a kind of way. But I think even if that's the captain obvious thing to do, that doesn't mean it shouldn't be done, and there wouldn't be some value to saying that. And you could say that without even making any changes today. Basically, it's not the vote of confidence, but it's we're evaluating this, and we're figuring out what we need to do, and we need to get this right, and we're not going to make any rash decisions, but we need to fix this, and we understand that. We're not just burying our head in the sand. We're not just going along.
When the Ravens go 9-7, we hold a public funeral and flogging and hanging for them. I mean, literally, we've been doing that for a generation now. For 20 years, we've done that. When the Orioles win or when they lose, they hide. They raise ticket prices. They take your cable money, and they don't really give a rat's ass whether you show up or not. I mean, that's pretty obvious.
But my point is, even if they would do that, because we were just saying how we're amazed that they haven't made moves. I don't need to see Buck Showalter fired this week. That's not doing anything for me. If you are wavering or trying to figure out at this point in evaluating whether he's going to be the guy that leads your rebuild over the next couple of years, I'm fine with taking more time to look at that. So I don't need to see Buck Showalter fired. I don't need to see Dan Duquette kicked out the door early. I think there's probably some PR value to doing something, whether it's getting a new hitting coach in here or something like that. But at the very
least, they've never cared about PR, though, right? I mean, that's just never been the way.
No, I understand, but if we're talking about what they should do, if we're just going to say what they're going to do, then this conversation's pretty short, right? I mean, we're trying to figure out what should be done here. And
what should be done should be the pointing toward next year, and they should be talking openly now about young guys, and probably be much more transparent about dealing Machado than they've even been if they were a normal organization. If this were, and I'm just giving you an example, a hockey example, because I can't think of a baseball example right now. We've talked about Bork, right? Like,
but what do you expect? They're not going to go out there and say, well, Philadelphia offered us this guy. That's not how it works either. I mean, Dan Duquette said earlier this week that they've had conversations about Machado. Dan's not going to. I mean, look.
But it's so dysfunctional because Dan's not really running the place, and Dan's not really calling the shots, and Dan's not going to be here in 90 days. So to put him out in front of it is. It's Sarah Huckabee Sanders disingenuous to begin with. So I don't.
Well, look.
I don't know what they can do, dude. I mean, there's nothing that's going to deodorize 19 and 48, but other than to maybe look like you know what the hell you might be doing moving forward, and they don't even have any way to fake it. You know what I mean?
Well,
really.
But to my point, even if you deliver a message that you're in the process of doing that, and look, that's not a message for Buck Showalter to deliver. That's not a message for Dan Duquette to deliver. That needs to come higher.
But it's got to be a real message. It's propping people up and sending them out there to tell lies. The old man has been doing that for 25 years. I mean, it's got to be better than that. It's got to sort of make sense to people like you and I, because to the people out there collecting bobbleheads this weekend, they don't really care. I mean, they're going to go when it's bad. They went when it was bad for 15 years. So they're going to go when it's bad. They are. I'm not, but they are.
That's not a big group, though. Believe me. I mean, even for the Red Sox series, I mean, even Dylan Bundy bobblehead night on Tuesday night, they had 21,000 people there, and it probably was close to being a legit 21,000 because I think it was it looked like an okay crowd, but that's the best they did for a 3-game set against the Red Sox, and that's even with Red Sox fans coming into town. So, at this point, I mean, some of what we're saying here, and you hit the nail on the head. They're not going to do anything right now that's going to fix this. They have to trade Manny Machado, but you can only trade him once. So
the only thing they can do, honestly, and I'm going to begin my series with this, is try to be transparent, but they have no ability to do that.
What do you want them to say from that standpoint? They're not going to talk about trade discussions. No teams do that. I mean, like, I don't
mean in that sort of way. I mean transparent, that there is a plan here and that they're on a 8-month, 9-month rebuilding cycle, and that they're going to stop giving away their international money, that they're going to stop doing stupid-ish.
Fair enough.
You know what I mean? Like, and they don't even acknowledge that they've ever done any stupid-ish. God, I wish I could have HBO. But, they're like an addict, dude, They're addicted to the way they are, and the way they are is not a winning way to be. I mean, having taken a train down and watched a winning organization, a team that's done nothing but win lately, quite frankly, with the Capitals, and they finally win the big banana. Boy, there's a real big difference in standing around Barry Trotz and Matt Niskanen and Ted Leonsis and Orpik than there is standing around literally Buck Showalter, Dan Duquette, who don't know the left from their right now and are playing on a 90-day contract.
Okay, let's not completely throw the baby out with the bathwater. Buck Showalter and Dan Duquette specifically. Now, above them and chain of command and dysfunction, those two functioned at a really high level despite that for a long time.
Because they had good baseball players. Because McPhail gave them good baseball players, I think.
So they don't get any credit now?
No. I mean, they're all a part of the stew, but they got to own 284 too, and they have to own that they worked.
Become an idiot overnight is my point.
They worked within the framework of this dysfunction, and when Brady Anderson came in, they moved over and swallowed. And when things are going wrong and things aren't being done the right way, and the old man's giving Davis $161 million, they're complicit in how screwed up it is because they work there. I mean,
okay, but now you're completely dismissing what the success that they did have. And look, that's not to say that I think Buck Showalter should be Teflon and to act like he won 3 World Series.
Dude, he's like a king. I mean, he really is. I mean, he won some games, Renner, did a nice job. Not lately.
But 3 years ago, you were ready to give the guy a statue because he somehow figured out how to win despite Peter Angelo. So let's not completely tear that down now. And that's not to say that I think he should stay. My personal opinion is it's time to scrap it all and start over. So I've made that clear in my position, but this season doesn't completely erase what happened there before. It's a product of your window closed. You waited too long to trade assets that should have been traded, like Manny Machado, like Zach Britton. Your minor league system is all dependent on amateur draft and nothing on the international market. So it makes
you are a poorly run franchise, is what you're defining.
Sure, but my point is, you can acknowledge it being a poorly run franchise without just saying everything stinks. I mean, you're painting a broad brush, and basically now you're saying Buck Showalter's an idiot.
Oh, I think the things that they had that might have been assets, like Duquette and Showalter and Adam Jones and Manny Machado,
and it's run its course.
They've run them all off,
over.
and they have nothing left to show for it.
So, and look, I'm not trying to turn this into trying to stick up for, but it's just they were. I think when it's all said and done, the era of Buck Showalter and Dan Duquette should be looked at favorably, especially considering what the challenges that they dealt with and the success that they had relative to other people, managers, general managers who were in here in the Peter Angelos era and couldn't function with that. Now, that said, that's history, and that doesn't mean that they should stay there forever. And I think it's pretty clear, really probably since the Toronto thing, Dan Duquette hasn't had the same amount of power. He still does, it's not as though he doesn't do anything in this organization, but we've seen what's happened with, the Chris Davis signing and, Chris Tillman and even Alex Cobb and Andrew Kashner this past offseason. It's very clear that there needs to be a definitive chain of command, and that's not there. And until there is, it's not going to matter who they bring in. They'll have some success if they have some talent, and they're allowed to function within a certain structure of parameters, which I think was the case probably early on in Dan Duquette's tenure here. But, you get to a point where that wanes a little bit. Duquette obviously wanted the Toronto job, and the aftermath of that has been rocky at best. And in the process of that, Buck Showalter probably got more power than he probably should have had as a manager when it comes to personnel. So, it's clearly gone sour, and it's clearly a disaster now. But I guess my point is, we don't need to defecate and throw dirt all over the entire era, and just because it is what it is now. More so, it's what are you going to do now to move on and put yourself back on a path toward being competitive again at some point. You hope in the not too distant future, but acknowledging it's probably going to take a while. So, I've made it clear I would probably start fresh from kind of top to bottom in that regard. We'll see if they ultimately do that. But in the meantime, yeah, it sure would be, even if it's a Captain Obvious kind of thing, for ownership to get in front of some cameras and some microphones and basically say, this is messed up. We need to fix this. There are things we need to do way better. There are things that we need to change. There are people we need to bring in to help us do that. And even if they don't do any of those actual acts tomorrow, then it would at least make you feel, their heads aren't in the sand. And that's the part of this that continues to be amazing. And, like I said, firing Scott Coolball is not saving the season. It's not causing anyone to go out and buy tickets, but that would just be one example of something they could do as an organization to just say, well, we're making this change now for this reason. There are going to be plenty of other changes coming here over the next 3 or 4 months.
All right, we'll get back after this. My Dear Orioles series begins next week. I will, one by one, offer letters of, I don't know, honesty, encouragement, support, criticism, constructive criticism. I don't know. Luke, what would you call what I'm trying to do?
Probably constructive criticism and probably a sense
conversation starter.
And I think there's definitely a sense of this is an era-changing time. This is a defining moment time. This is a pivot point in the history of the organization in the same way that when Buck Showalter arrived and when Dan Duquette arrived, to piggyback off the good work that Andy McPhail did, that was pivotal, and you saw the success they had. Now, that era is over. That window has slammed shut and shattered at this point. That's obvious. Now what's next? What is going to be the next era? Who's going to be the next general manager, the next manager, the next Manny Machado-type talent? Maybe not quite that good, but you're hoping someone that can be that next young all-star that you develop or you add or you sign off the international market finally. People are waiting to see what that's going to be. So I think it's kind of it's a look back on what was a pretty fun era that's clearly over, and now it's a look ahead to how the heck are you going to go about fixing what is an absolute mess, an absolute disaster of a baseball team right now.
Absolute disaster of a baseball team. I'm going to quote you on that out on the internet.
Yeah, I mean, hey, you're 30 games under 500. Just because I'm trying to acknowledge that.
Hey, you're the nice guy here. I mean, you are.
Well, just because I want to acknowledge that Buck Showalter and Dan Duquette didn't suddenly become morons overnight, doesn't mean that.
No. They signed up to run an organization full of morons, run by morons. They knew that when they signed up, and they deodorized the place for a while, and now. Yeah. Bad decisions,
for that.
Bad decision after bad decision after bad decision. At some point, the boat hits the side of the of the shore, and they don't have the money to fix that. They don't have the talent to fix that. They certainly don't have a philosophy or a strategy to fix that, and that's the problem. And that's why I'm writing my Dear Orioles series, which will begin next week. All right, enough. The Marlins are coming to town. Maybe they can win a game or two. Okay.
Yeah, I was asked, will the Orioles get to 20 wins or 50 losses first? And I said, I'll go with 20 because the Marlins are in town. But that said, the Marlins, who are terrible, they're even several games better than the Orioles now. So it just shows how rough, how terrible, how nightmarish this whole thing is. Boy, only, 2.5 months ago, you were picking them to win, 85 games, and I had them, I think, at 82. Boy, were we wrong. Boy, was everyone wrong, and that's where...
I'm not going to admit to that, and I have deleted those tweets. Just so you know.
But that also speaks to the historical nature of how this thing has completely gone off the rails, where, if you started the season over again, I think this team would still be bad. I'm not sure they'd be 30 games under 500. I think this has just spiraled in so many ways, and no one has any idea how to stop it at this point.
Baltimore Luke is the way to find him out on Twitter, and Luke at WNST.net. You can find us out in the Toyota.com Audio Vault 24 hours a day for all the great stuff that we've done here this week. Many hockey guests, lots of looks at the World Cup as the World Cup gets underway now in Russia. Steve Goff from the Washington Post checked in from Moscow, talked to Pete Carinci and Dennis and Cabral about that. Tons of hockey stuff ahead, including next week, the Ravens passing camp and open camp this week, throwing the football around, coming to a conclusion, and the Orioles thudding into last place. My Dear Orioles series begins next week. We're going to begin a focus on that. We still have our bus trip to Ray Lewis and Canton. We're putting that together, as well as Nashville and my 50th birthday. All of that under the Road Trips tab at WNST.net. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live as well as out on our YouTube and WNSTV channels. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.